How is it possible that Ferrari, leading with authority and with the best package of improvements of the entire season, ended up completely self-destructing in Miami, until provoking the total fury of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton against their own wall? Because what happened at the 2026 Miami GP was not a simple mistake. It was a disastrous management of stops that changed the fate of the race in a matter of laps, once again exposing Ferrari's strategic weakness and igniting an internal tension that had been growing for some time. The 2026 Miami Grand Prix began with a completely different feeling within Ferrari. After weeks of work, intense development, and introducing one of the most aggressive improvement packages on the entire grid, the team arrived with a clear certainty. This time they did have a car to fight for victory. And it was not an illusion. From the start of the weekend, the pace was there, the confidence was there, and both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton felt they had a real opportunity to change the course of the season. The classification left mixed signals, but there was optimism within the team. Leclerc managed to get into a strong position on the grid, while Hamilton, although further behind, was already experiencing discomfort due to configuration changes that forced him to adapt on the fly. Even so, the internal message was clear. Race pace was going to be his great weapon. Ferrari was confident in its execution, in its strategy, and that is where the problem began to arise that would end up exploding hours later. The start was the highest point of the entire race for Ferrari. In just a few corners, Leclerc executed a brilliant maneuver that allowed him to take the lead, overtaking direct rivals and demonstrating that the car had the potential they had so sought. It was the perfect scenario: clean track, control of the pace, and a completely open strategic window. Meanwhile, Hamilton was conditioned from the start by a touch that damaged his car, forcing him to manage throughout the race and complicating any alternative plan from the wall. But this is where the real tension begins. Because while Leclerc was leading and seemed to have the race under control, doubts were beginning to arise on the Ferrari wall. The degradation, the rivals' times, the stopping windows, everything was beginning to become more complex than expected. And instead of reacting clearly, the team began to hesitate. The decisions were not firm, the communications were not precise, and the most worrying thing, time was beginning to play against them. Ferrari had the position, it had the pace, but it did not have the strategic control. And that, in modern Formula One, is a dangerous combination. What came next was not an isolated mistake, but a chain of poorly executed decisions that would end up completely removing Ferrari from the fight for victory and igniting the total frustration of its two drivers, especially when they began to understand that the race was slipping away from them from the wall, not from the track. The critical moment of the race did not come suddenly. It was built lap by lap, decision after decision, until Ferrari crossed a point of no return. Because while Charles Leclerc maintained the lead on the track, what was happening behind the walls of other teams began to set the true course of the Grand Prix. And that is where the factor that changes everything comes into play: the strategic management around the stops, especially the reading that was done from Oscar Piastri's side. Ferrari hesitated. And in Formula One, to hesitate is to lose. The team had a clear window to execute the stop at the optimal moment, protect the position, and react to the movements of its rivals. But instead of anticipating, he decided to wait, analyze, confirm. And meanwhile, other teams began to move with greater determination. The direct reference was what was happening with Piastri, whose strategy was beginning to indirectly put pressure on Ferrari, forcing them to rethink every second instead of executing with conviction. And that's where the domino effect began. Every extra lap on the track with degraded tires not only made Leclerc lose performance, but also opened the door to a devastating undercut. Ferrari knew it, but reacted late. When they finally made the decision to pit, the lead had already evaporated. What should have been a stop to consolidate the lead became an exit into traffic, a loss of position, the beginning of total chaos. From the cockpit, the situation was evident. Leclerc began to feel that something was not right. That they were losing the race without having been surpassed on the track. That everything was slipping away due to decisions outside his control. And on the other side of the garage, Lewis Hamilton's frustration grew even more, because conditioned from the beginning, he depended completely on a perfect strategy that never arrived. But the most serious thing was not just the error, it was the feeling of disorder. Communications did not convey security. Decisions seemed reactive, not planned. And in the midst of that chaos, the constant reference to what Piastri's strategic environment was doing ended up lighting the fuse. Because both Leclerc and Hamilton began to perceive that Ferrari was not competing against rivals, but rather reacting late to them. And then everything exploded. Frustration turned into anger. The radios began to strain. The doubts became direct complaints. Because when a driver feels like he's losing a winnable race from the wall, confidence is immediately broken. And that's exactly what happened in Miami. Ferrari not only lost the victory, it lost control of the race, of the strategy, and, at times, even of its own drivers. And then came the final blow. The moment where everything Ferrari had built over the weekend ended up collapsing in a matter of seconds. Because if the strategy had already compromised the race, what happened next was simply the inevitable consequence of that mismanagement. Charles Leclerc, who had gone from leading with authority to fighting out of position due to wall decisions, began to force more than necessary. He was no longer managing a victory, he was trying to recover a race that had been taken from him from the pits. And in that context, the error arrived. The spinning top. A moment that defines the entire career. A moment where pressure, frustration, and total loss of strategic control converge. Leclerc loses the car, false positions, and with that Ferrari ends up definitively sinking in the classifier. What could have been a clear victory becomes an irrelevant result, far from the podium, far from any real objective. On the other hand, Lewis Hamilton's career was already conditioned from the beginning, but what happened with the strategy ended up dooming any possibility. Without a clean rhythm, with damage to the car and completely dependent on external decisions, Hamilton is also dragged into the general chaos of the team. It was no longer a matter of piloting, it was a structure failing as a whole. And that's where everything explodes. Because when both drivers understand that they did not lose because of pace, that they did not lose on the track but because of wrong decisions from the wall, the reaction is inevitable. The frustration accumulated during the race turns into direct anger, into internal tension, into a clear breach of trust. The radios reflect it, the statements hint at it, and the feeling within the team is evident. This was not a simple mistake, it was a structural failure. Ferrari didn't just lose points. He lost credibility in one of the most important moments of the season. And the most worrying thing is not the result. It is the pattern. Because this story has been repeated before. Late decisions, poor reading of the race, lack of reaction to rival movements. And now, with two drivers like Leclerc and Hamilton, that internal pressure is much greater. There is no longer any room for errors of this type. Not when you have the car. Not when you have the chance. Not when you have everything to win. Miami 2026 will not be remembered only for the victory of another team. It will be remembered as the day when Ferrari failed again from the most critical place, the wall. The conclusion of everything that happened in the 2026 Miami GP is as clear as it is worrying. Ferrari did not lose this race due to a lack of rhythm. It lost it due to not knowing how to execute when it mattered most. They had the car, they had the position, they had control, but they let him escape from the wall, and that is what really unleashed the fury of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. Because when a driver leads with solvency and ends up out of the fight due to poorly managed strategic decisions, the problem stops being punctual and becomes structural. Ferrari once again showed that weakness that it has had for seasons. The inability to make firm decisions under pressure, the lack of reaction to rival movements, and a race reading that always arrives late. And in a context where every detail defines the result, you pay dearly for that. The most delicate thing is not only the final result but the internal impact. Trust between drivers and team is key in Formula One, and when that trust is broken, the consequences go far beyond a single race. Miami leaves an open wound within Ferrari, an evident tension that could mark the development of the rest of the season if it is not corrected immediately. Because Ferrari can no longer afford these types of mistakes. Not with two drivers of this level. Not in a season where every opportunity counts. And above all, not when they have shown that they do have the potential to win. Miami wasn't just a loss, it was a warning. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.